April 9, 1940. In Copenhagen, dawn breaks with an ultimatum: surrender or watch the city destroyed from the air. Hours later, Denmark ceases to exist as an independent nation. Meanwhile, in Norway, leaders scramble as German troops land in every vital port, seizing the north. The Allies had called Scandinavia safe. So how did two nations fall with barely a warning? The speed and confusion behind this collapse would forever alter the course of World War II. The answer begins the moment Denmark faced the impossible. At 4 in the morning, the German envoy arrived at the Danish Foreign Ministry carrying a note. The message was blunt: accept occupation or face the destruction of Copenhagen from the air. There was no warning, no declaration, just the threat of annihilation delivered in the half-light of dawn. Within minutes, German troops began landing in Copenhagen harbor. The mine layer, Hansestadt Danzig, docked at 4:20 in the morning, and soldiers fanned out in silence, heading straight for the citadel. By the time the city's first trams rattled down the streets, the fortress at the heart of the capital was already under German control. News of the landings reached the Danish cabinet as they gathered in emergency session. Reports flooded in, columns of troops advancing from the south, bridges seized, airfields under attack. The ultimatum left no room for negotiation. Prime Minister Thorvald Stauning, King Christian X, and their ministers faced a single question: resist and risk the capital's destruction, or surrender and preserve lives. Memories of Warsaw's devastation the previous autumn weighed heavily on every mind in the room. Outside, the city was eerily quiet, but the sense of a ticking clock pressed in on every decision. With German forces occupying the harbor and threatening the city from the air, Denmark's options narrowed by the minute. The cabinet's debate would decide the fate of the nation before sunrise. At Værløse airfield, the sound of engines shattered the morning calm. German Messerschmitts swept in low, their machine guns raking the runways. Within minutes, nearly half of Denmark's military aircraft lay in ruins, burning wrecks scattered across the tarmac. The Danish Army Air Service, outnumbered and outgunned, could offer no real defense. Reports from the airfield reached Copenhagen as the cabinet sat in session, the news grim and immediate. The country's last hope for air resistance had been wiped out before it could even take flight. Inside the cabinet room, the debate turned from strategy to survival. Prime Minister Thorvald Stauning listened as ministers weighed the cost of further resistance. Memories of Warsaw, flattened by German bombers in 1939, hung over every word. The threat was not abstract. German aircraft were already circling above, and the city's fate could be decided in a single order. The Danish military, scattered and ill-equipped, had no path to victory. The choice narrowed to capitulation or catastrophe. At 7:20, Stauning gave the order for a ceasefire. The decision was recorded in the cabinet minutes. Denmark would surrender to spare Copenhagen from destruction. The guns fell silent. In a matter of hours, the country had traded its freedom for the hope of saving civilian lives. Outside, the city remained eerily quiet, a fragile peace held together by the weight of a single, irreversible decision. As the German occupation settled in, The consequences of that morning would echo far beyond Denmark's borders, drawing a sharp line between survival and resistance. Soon, the focus of the war would shift north, where Norway braced for its own trial. In the pre-dawn darkness of April 9th, German warships pressed up the Oslo fjord, engines muffled, intent on seizing the Norwegian capital before sunrise. At the narrowest point, just south of Oslo, the heavy cruiser Blücher led the invasion fleet, her decks crowded with troops, her orders clear. Reach Oslo, capture the king and government, and end resistance before it could begin. But waiting at Oscarsborg Fortress, Colonel Birger Eriksen faced an impossible choice. With only training crews and aging guns, he saw the silhouettes of German ships sliding through the mist. He gave the order, "Open fire." The Bortosresibines battery roared, shells slamming into Blücher's superstructure. Searchlights snapped on, catching the cruiser in their glare. Norwegian gunners loaded torpedoes, relics from another era, but still deadly. The first torpedo missed its mark, but the second struck amidships. Flames tore through the cruiser. Ammunition stores exploded, sending smoke billowing into the fjord. Within half an hour, Blücher was sinking, hundreds of German soldiers and sailors thrown into freezing water. The loss stunned the German command. The rest of the fleet turned back, fearing mines or more hidden guns. For nearly 6 hours, the advance on Oslo stalled. That window allowed King Haakon VII, his ministers, and Norway's gold reserves to escape north by train. Eriksen's decision, made in minutes, bought time the country desperately needed. The fortress's guns fell silent by the next day, but the delay at Oscarsborg changed the tempo of the invasion, forcing the Germans to improvise and giving Norway a brief, vital chance to resist. At midday on April 9th, as German forces advanced through Norway, a new voice seized the airwaves. Vidkun Quisling, a former defense minister with a reputation for authoritarian ambition, entered the studios of NRK in Oslo. Backed by German officers, he declared himself Norway's new prime minister and ordered all resistance to cease. His announcement, delivered in a steady but unsteady tone, claimed the government had abandoned its post and that only he could restore order. Across the country, listeners were stunned. Some believed the government had collapsed. Others recognized the COUP as a betrayal. Word of Quisling's broadcast reached King Haakon VII and his cabinet as they moved north, evading capture. The king faced a demand from German envoys to appoint Quisling and accept German protection, or to risk Oslo's destruction. In a message relayed to his ministers and soon broadcast on Norwegian radio, he made his position clear. He would not legitimize a regime imposed by foreign force. The government, still intact, called for continued resistance. Haakon's refusal was more than symbolic. It gave Norwegians a rallying point and denied Quisling the legitimacy he craved. The battle for Norway's future now played out not only in mountain passes and city streets, but on the airwaves. Each broadcast shaped public perception, fueling confusion or resolve. With Quisling's claims exposed and the king's defiance echoing across the country, Norwegians faced a stark choice: submit to occupation or resist, uncertain of what the next day would bring. As dawn broke along the Norwegian coast, a new phase of the invasion unfolded. At Stavanger, German transport planes swept low over the Sola airfield. Paratroopers jumped before the defenses could react, marking the first large-scale airborne assault in military history. Norwegian anti-aircraft crews fired back, but within an hour, Sola was under German control. The airfield's capture opened the skies for waves of Luftwaffe reinforcements, linking the airborne troops with infantry arriving by sea. Local staff tried desperately to hide remaining aircraft, but the runways filled with German planes, and resistance quickly collapsed. Further north, German warships approached Bergen and Trondheim. In Bergen, the cruiser Königsberg and her escorts slipped past coastal batteries under cover of darkness. Troops poured ashore at the harbor, fanning out to secure the city and its vital port facilities. The speed of the attack left Norwegian defenders scrambling. By midday, Bergen's key infrastructure had fallen. Rail yards, communications centers, and the port itself were all in German hands. The city's capture gave Germany a direct link to the North Sea and a base for naval operations. At Trondheim, German destroyers sailed into the fjord, landing troops at multiple points along the waterfront. Norwegian commanders, caught between conflicting orders and rumors of government collapse, struggled to organize a defense. Within hours, German forces seized the city center, railway stations, and the nearby airfield. The rapid fall of Trondheim cut off northern Norway from the rest of the country, paving the way for deeper advances into the interior. With Sola, Bergen, and Trondheim in German hands, the invasion gained momentum. Each captured port became a springboard for new operations, allowing troops and supplies to move inland almost unopposed. The methodical seizure of these coastal strongholds left Norway's defenders scattered and uncertain as the front lines shifted rapidly northward. The focus now turned to Narvik, where the battle for control of the iron ore route was just beginning. Narvik, perched above the Arctic Circle, became the most valuable prize in the north. At dawn, on April 9th, German destroyers slipped into the fjord under cover of darkness, carrying troops from General Edvard Diedel's 3rd Mountain Division. Norwegian coastal defense ships Eidsvold and Norge tried to block the landing. Both were sunk within minutes. Eidsvold was hit by torpedoes, and Norge was shattered by shells. 276 Norwegian sailors never made it to shore. By midday, Narvik was under German control. But the fight for the town was only beginning. Narvik's port was more than a dot on the map. It was the gateway for Swedish iron ore, the lifeblood of Germany's war industry. Each winter, when the Baltic froze, nearly all Swedish ore traveled by rail to Narvik, then out to sea. Whoever held Narvik controlled the iron that fed Europe's steel mills. General Carl Gustav Fleischer, commander of Norway's 6th Division, refused to let the occupation stand. Operating from the snow-bound hills above the port, he rallied scattered troops and local volunteers. Fleischer's men, many of them reservists and school teachers, dug in along the railway and mountain passes. In his diary, a Norwegian soldier wrote, "We fight for every meter. The snow is red in places, but we hold." Despite losing the town, Norwegian forces harassed the Germans with hit-and-run attacks, blowing up rail lines and ambushing patrols. The mountains around Narvik became a maze of resistance. Supplies were scarce, the cold relentless, but morale held. Fleischer's leadership, calm, methodical, unyielding, gave his men a sense of purpose when the rest of the country seemed to be slipping away. For the Germans, Norway was a foothold. For the Norwegians, it was a test of endurance. The iron ore route remained the prize. But now, every train, every shipment, moved under threat. The battle for Narvik was far from over. On the morning of April 3rd, Britain's War Cabinet gathered in London, facing a decision that would haunt every man at the table. The plan, on paper, was straightforward: to mine the Norwegian coastal waters and block German shipments of Swedish iron ore. Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, pressed hard for immediate action. He argued that delay would only hand the initiative to Berlin. Across the table, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain hesitated. He worried about violating Norwegian neutrality and provoking international outrage. Admiral Dudley Pound, Chief of the Naval Staff, raised practical doubts about weather, readiness, and the risk of German retaliation. The debate dragged on for days, with Churchill growing more frustrated as each hour passed. By April 5th, the British fleet was still at anchor. Orders changed, and then changed again. Some in the cabinet feared that mining without warning would drive Norway into Germany's arms. Others insisted that inaction would allow Hitler to strike first. Each argument circled back to the same point. Hesitation ruled the day. No one wanted to be responsible for igniting a wider war, and no one could guarantee safety by standing still. Minutes from the cabinet meetings reveal a room divided. Churchill's memos from April 6th describe urgent necessity, while Chamberlain's notes show deep unease about the diplomatic consequences. Meanwhile, intelligence reports warned of German ships massing in the Baltic. The evidence was mounting, but hesitation ruled the day. On April 8th, 5 days after Churchill's first call to act, Operation Wilfred finally went ahead. British ships laid mines off Narvik and at other key points along the Norwegian coast. But the delay proved fatal. German invasion convoys were already at sea. By the time the mines hit the water, the enemy was hours from landing. The chance to blunt the attack had slipped away, lost in the fog of debate and delay. In the words of one British officer, "We mined the fjords, just in time to be too late." The Allied push to reclaim central Norway began with hope, but unraveled in chaos. At Namsos, British and French troops landed on April 14th, aiming to strike south toward Trondheim. The plan faltered almost immediately. German air superiority swept the skies clean, and Luftwaffe bombers hammered the harbor, setting supply dumps ablaze and sinking landing craft before they could unload. Roads out of the town clogged with snowdrifts and wreckage, while telegraph lines snapped under relentless raids. Quartermasters reported that ammunition and medical kits never reached the front. Soldiers rationed food as days stretched into weeks. Reinforcements promised from the sea never arrived in strength. In Andelsnes, British brigades faced the same pattern, battered by air attack, cut off by German mountain troops, and forced to retreat through narrow valleys choked with refugees and abandoned gear. By late April, the order came to withdraw. The evacuation at Namsos began under cover of darkness on April 30th. Fog rolled in from the fjords, delaying the embarkation for hours. Over 2 nights, 5,400 troops crowded onto destroyers and transports, leaving behind most of their heavy equipment. As the last ship slipped away, German bombers caught the convoy at sea. The French destroyer Bison was hit first, exploding in a fireball. HMS Afridi moved in to rescue survivors, but was struck moments later, sinking with over 100 men still aboard. In total, more than 250 lives were lost in the withdrawal from Namsos alone. At Andelsnes, the story was no less grim. Between April 30th and May 1st, 4,400 men were evacuated, many suffering from frostbite and exhaustion. Nearly all artillery, vehicles, and supplies had to be destroyed or abandoned. German troops entered the empty town the next morning. Across both fronts, the Allies had failed to break the German grip on central Norway. The relief effort ended with battered units, sunken ships, and a trail of lost materiel stretching from the mountains to the sea. By June 10th, with Allied forces gone and resistance broken, Norway's government surrendered. The northern flank of the North Sea now belonged to Germany, secured not by overwhelming force, but by speed, confusion, and the collapse of Allied plans. Today, the speed and surprise that toppled Denmark and Norway haunt modern defense planning. NATO's northern flank remains critical, with Norway now a frontline state in Arctic security debates. Complacency and delayed action still threaten nations in unexpected ways. History doesn't always warn twice. Sometimes it just waits for the next moment when vigilance falters. Share your thoughts below. How ready are we for surprises now?